Salam alaikum. You're muted.
Walaikum assalam. How are you doing, man?
Pretty good.
Can
We were not
you
talking
hear
about
me?
you there. Yeah, I can hear you. You can hear me?
Okay.
Yeah, we were not talking about you there. If
Yeah, I
you, I
can.
think you came in right
Definitely.
at me saying someone's a
I kind of didn't want to
massive.
join it this time, because of the fact that my phone is like not at a high percentage, but it's at a decent percentage. So hopefully the conversation can be something which captures, or rather, how should I put this? Like, hopefully my phone does not die before the conversation is finished or something like that. So we've captured all the essential aspects,
Well,
basically.
if that
I think
way.
this one is. I think this one is. What's up?
No. Go for it. Continue.
I was gonna say I think this conversation will be more worthy of even recording because I think that unlike the other one, which you believe that it would be a reply to the NTT, I think this one would be like a direct response to the NTT or like given the trait specifically.
Yeah.
Although it depends on if you believe that this would be trivial or non-trivial, which we'll get into afterwards. So yeah.
Yeah. So I am recording. I have
Mhm.
the recording running. And
Gotcha.
I'll just
Cool.
say right at the outset, because sometimes this is a thing with religious people that I'm not necessarily trying to. Well, yeah. So I don't really necessarily want to talk about what's moral or not. I want to talk about what you have a preference to do, because there's a lot of things that on various religious views, as far
Uh-huh.
as I understand it, God is fine with. Like, as I mean, maybe there's some
Gotcha.
exceptions like Eid or something. I don't know much about Islam, but as far as I understand it,
Mm-hmm.
generally speaking, if not entirely, Allah does not have a problem with people being vegan, with Muslims being vegan. Correct?
Yeah, in fact, there was a specific moment in time where the Prophet ﷺ, he went on a journey where he was not eating animals deliberately for months. Like he went on that journey, and he tries to minimize eating animals. So, yeah, I mean that's kind of like compatible with a lot of things which are being established in a religion, but it's not something which is deemed as a moral obligation. Like for example, you would believe it to be. So I think that distinction is also something which is relevant, right?
Um. Okay. Well, whether that's relevant, we can talk about that. But
Yeah.
but yes, though, with so my point is basically think about like being a
Mm-hmm.
garbage man or something. A lot of people don't want to be a
Okay.
garbage man. It's like their preference, but there's no religious prohibition against being a garbage man or something. It's a totally fine
Of course,
job.
yeah, definitely.
So yeah, I'm
Mm-hmm.
more running NTT with respect to just your preferences because I don't want it to turn into just a debate about what's moral and then just get into a huge religion debate because to me that's all beside the point because we don't even
I
need to.
wasn't going to do that, by the way, because just to clarify one thing, I'm not the type of religious person who's like, okay, I think the moral relevant truth is going to be God's command. And no, that wasn't going to be my approach. In fact, every debate I participate in normative ethics, my normative ethical position, just to be clear for everyone, is not a divine command theory position. I take it so that I'm a virtue consequentialist, and so I think it is the case that God, when he's making moral commands, all he's doing there is just informing us of the relevant normative facts in a given moral normative system, which we could say tie back to the specific accurate normative ethical position that one might or might not hold. So I'm not just saying, oh, God says this, therefore that's justified. No, I'm not going to take that lazy approach just to make that pretty crystal clear moving forward, okay?
Yeah, no, okay. Well, then I don't think we need to even talk more about that because that roughly is the kind of territory that I'm trying to avoid. And it's not necessarily lazy, but it's a very common sort of roadblock with religious people, and a lot of people then get into a debate about religion, and we just don't need to because we can just talk
A
about what's
religion, yes,
preferable.
exactly. It becomes a religious debate, and I know that's kind of it's not even a matter of shifting the goalpost because, of course, if someone's ethics is predicated upon religion, then what's necessary for there to be some meaningful progression is for there to be religious debate. However, I know for a fact that when you're debating an atheist, for example, it's like having two debates at once, right? You're having two debates. You're having an ethical debate, a debate about ethics, and then on the other side of the coin, you're having a debate about religion. And so, preferably, the atheist, like for example, you who is an atheist, you want to just stick on the ethics without having to go into a conversation about the veracity of one's religion and the religious principles, right? So, yeah, I understand that perspective definitely. That's completely understandable.
Yeah, the only thing I'd flag is I'm agnostic with respect to a lot of gods. There's some that I think I'm an atheist with respect
Hmm.
to. Like I think I'm an atheist with respect to the Christian God, because I'm pretty sure that God is
Hmm.
contradictory. Um, Islam
Yeah,
I just really
I
don't
agree with
know
that too.
about. So if someone were to ask me about Islam, I'd just say I'm agnostic. Um, but yeah, okay. So yeah, let's
And
just
by the way, I would prefer about the before we get into the ethics stuff.
sure,
I think me and you just to like put any sort of possible. Although I don't think this conversation is going to be ego driven, but to put any possible ego aside, I think we could have a private conversation just about my religion and so forth, and just to
sure.
see your interest towards that. You know?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm always happy to do that. That
And
sounds fun.
by conversation, I mean like conversation, not like an actual debate or what I would deem to be a debate, like an actual normal conversation. Like, what do you think about this, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, no,
Okay,
I'm happy to do that. Yeah, sometimes yeah,
got you.
I had a good conversation with a Muslim guy who was in my school a while ago. So this would be my first conversation about Islam since then. But yeah, I mean that'd be fun, sure.
Okay, got you. So you mentioned the point previously in this beginning of this conversation. You talked about you're just asking for my preferences and not what is moral.
Well,
But presumably, when
before
you're talking about naming the traits,
before you start,
gonna
maybe just
gonna finish real quickly.
I well, you tell me if you want to finish. But the thing I was going to do is just
I
lay
want to
out the
finish first, and
question.
then you'll just give your point afterwards because I don't really like to be thrown off the point, really, you know.
You don't want the framing
So I
first.
was just gonna say that. What's up?
You don't want the framing first. I was going to do the framing.
No, I just yeah. I mean, if you want to frame first, I mean, go for it. I mean, you want to clarify, and so you can
Yeah,
go,
uh,
and then I'll just finish afterwards. Yeah.
sure. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, just for anyone listening fresh who doesn't know the question is basically, what is it that's true of animals that, if true of humans, would justify the same kind of behavior towards them? And by that behavior, we're talking in this case about like slicing their throats.
Okay, so I believe that what is true of the animals, which would be true of the human, sorry, what is true of the animals, which would make it the case that killing animals is justified, at least in most cases, not universally, but in most cases, in the normal case, unlike killing humans, would be the very fact that with the animals specifically, they don't satisfy a normative function, which I take to be relevant insofar as determining the ethical facts.
Okay,
So
I'm
the
gonna
morally relevant trait is not going to be just to clarify before you give your
sure.
response. The morally relevant trait, it's not going to be an empirical property. It's just going to be a normative function. So it's going to be the set of necessary and the sufficient conditions from the correct first order ethical theory perspective.
Okay, so I'm not totally sure I follow that. So this might turn into one of those kind of frustrating conversations if you feel that that's very clear and I feel that that's not very clear. But yeah, I would need to
I'm down to
understand what you
continuously
mean. Yeah,
clarify. That's fine.
sure.
Yeah. So what word do you want me to clarify moving forward? Normative function? What specifically?
Well, let me make sure I understand your response, and then I'll ask you to, or understand like the
Gotcha.
structure of it. Then we can ask about parts of it. So let's like write it down actually. So the quick version is
Okay.
just their normative function.
Yeah, so there exists a normative function which would determine the ethical facts regarding it not being immoral to kill animals. However, it is immoral to kill humans. So humans possess, or rather, humans participate in the normative function, which makes it unjustified to kill those specific beings, in contrast with animals which don't participate in those normative function, at least generally speaking. Not universally. I can perhaps give some extreme case scenario where animals do in fact participate in this normative function, but under normal standard conditions, this is not the case.
Okay,
Right.
so if I sum that up
Hmm.
at a high level, and we'll get into what it
Gotcha.
means, is what I've written in text here okay? The trait equals their
Let me
normative
just check
function?
real quick. Hold on.
Sure.
Mm-mm. Yeah, well, the trait is going to be their normative function or their participation in the normative function, I should say.
Their participation, okay, so their
Yeah,
let me just write this down. Participation
gotcha.
in the normative function. So the idea is that
Yes.
animals don't participate in the normative function and humans do.
Yeah, they don't participate in the normative function, which makes it the case that killing these specific beings would be immoral. In contrast with that specific case scenario, human beings participate in this normative function, which makes it the case that killing these specific set of beings would be something which is which is immoral.
So, what exactly is a normative function?
Definitely. And normative function, under just how I'm defining it, is just a causal role which plays a role in upholding or constituting the normative order. And the normative order is just like reasons in favor of a given action or obligations and expectations that govern like moral action, for example. So it guides us towards what we should do, what we should not do, given these practical considerations slash reasons.
Okay, this I can tell this is going to be really for me this is going to be hard to unpack because there's a lot of language there that I'm not really following. Just not to imply it doesn't make sense,
Gotcha.
but it's like very far from the kind of thinking that I'm used to. So, let's try
Okay,
it
that's
like
fine.
this, I guess. So,
I can give examples, by the way,
well, I kind
that
of
would clarify a lot of stuff.
I'm open to examples, but I want to suggest one
Hmm.
way to approach it, which is like I can kind of highlight, if you look in general, I can highlight the part that I don't understand, and then we're basically looking
Hmm.
for some kind of synonym to replace that I do understand, and we can kind of trace down the synonym tree until either eventually it bottoms out somewhere I can understand, and then I'd be able to assess the view, or it wouldn't, and then we just end at like I just don't really understand what the view is.
Okay, so for synonyms, I think synonyms, especially in philosophy, are usually something which is not that informative. I think like in a lot of cases where someone uses a synonym, it doesn't really clarify the concept. It just goes into that this circular type tangential point. Which I think in philosophical discourses, especially in esoteric stuff like this, for instance, I think the best means by doing such, by clarifying the concept, is by giving examples, giving ostensive accounts to explicate on the given example
Yeah,
or concept. One
before
can
you do
say.
that, let me just respond to that. So that's fine. Synonyms are a suggestion. I think
Hmm.
we'll both agree that synonyms are useful in the case that someone is confused about a term but isn't confused about one of the synonyms, because then obviously you give the synonym and they understand the term. We agree about
Yeah.
that, obviously. Yeah, that's pretty
Wait,
trivial.
wait, sorry. What was the last part of the sentence? I heard the part about
Oh,
like you were just saying the synonyms or suggestion. Right?
I
What
was
was the last part?
I was the first thing I'm saying is that synonyms
Mm-hmm.
are sometimes useful, and trivially, the case where it's
Yeah.
useful is when someone doesn't understand a term but does understand a synonym, because then when you say the thing that you do understand is a synonym, then they understand the original term. But I'm also
Exactly.
yes, but I'm also happy to have terms conveyed by any means. Like sometimes in debate, people
Like
say,
one example,
well, let me finish
like
because I
one
have
example
barely
of a
anything.
synonym not being.
I have barely anything left, so I'll just say the last part. I'm down for it to be conveyed by whatever means. It could be ostension, it could be a synonym, it could be a definition, anything that gets
Yeah.
into my head. Yeah,
Got you. The definition part could work. I think that could work. But if that does not work, I'd prefer to use extension. Like
sure.
one example, of course, we know of like synonyms not being useful is like if I define what we should do as what we ought to do. Like, okay, like how is it this clarifying the concept? But
Mm-hmm.
okay, that's fine. So normative function, is that the word you want me to define or clarify, or is it something else?
Yeah, and let's just all okay. Properly basic. You are popping off and it's triggering me. I gotta mute you. 1 second. Server mute. Also, okay, I don't want to address chat the whole time, but I don't think that's what I mean, Avi. I think by synonym I do mean something that has the same meaning. Yeah, so I'm fine with you doing so let's just this is what I want to say. What I need is for you to convey to me what you mean. You could convey it by whatever means you think is best. You can try different ones. You can
Mhm.
try definition, you can try
Okay, got you.
ostension, you can try a synonym, whatever works.
Okay, so by normative function, right? For there to be a normative function, right, there has to be an action, and you can type this down while I'm just like making the point to make sure that we're
Sure.
both on the same track. Okay.
Yeah,
By
get
normative function, I'm talking about an action and that given action's relation to a specific thing which is sufficient for that action to be moral slash immoral. So one
sorry, say that
example would be like,
again.
for instance,
You're talking faster than
yeah,
I'm writing. Say it one more time.
yeah. So the normative function for that to exist, right? There has to be a given action which is being assessed by a moral agent, like for example, Isaac or Apollo. And with that action, there is a specific relation between that action and a specific thing which is sufficient for that action to be immoral or moral, respectively. Not amoral, but moral or immoral.
I'm
And then I'll
getting
just give the example afterwards. It's going to clarify everything afterwards.
sure. Okay, yeah, sure.
Okay, so one thing is like the action of you tripping over a rock. It's not immoral and it's not moral, right? There's nothing immoral or moral about that given action because that action itself is not satisfying any property which is relevant, which are sorry, any property which is sufficient, which makes an action moral or immoral. And when I'm talking about properties and it being sufficient or insufficient in determining an action being moral, that just depends on one's theory of normative ethics or first order ethics, to be clear.
Okay, I'm getting confused.
Yeah.
I'm also I this is rude to respond
I
to
thought you were going to
fucking
say I'm getting there, but I got let off when you said confused afterwards.
yeah,
God damn it. But continue.
sorry. Yeah, like this might very well be one of those conversations that just ends in me not understanding what you're saying. I also this is rude. I
Mm-hmm.
shouldn't reply to people in chat, but obvious triggering me. You said AY means synonym as not a similar but not the same thing. I don't understand that. I mean something that means the same thing. So maybe I'm misreading you.
Yeah, that's equivalent to what I just said.
What? No,
It's
what?
not that you mean synonym as something that's similar but not the same thing. So it means
Oh,
that you do
not
mean the same
oh.
thing.
So it's like if sorry, I see. So it's like if there's okay, but this is legitimately ambiguous though. What we need, you mean like this basically, like if it's a logical statement, like a synonym as not a similar but not the same thing.
Yeah, I just bring that up because just to make sure that your interlocutor might not might pu- seems like your interlocutor was pushing back on synonyms being a useful clarifying tool, and I just wanted to be clear that you do mean that it's the same thing as a synonym.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
that would be a clarifying tool
I
if you found one.
understand. I understand what you mean. So I agree. That's fine. Yeah. Okay. Sorry. So okay. Apollo. Let me go back to our
What's up?
thing. So how do I get my definition back? One
Mm-hmm.
sec. I got to get the thing I'm typing. So okay. I am still
Mm-hmm.
stuck on understanding normative function. That is the part
Yeah, I was
that's
just going to give you the
fucking me.
extensions that you thought was also another suggestion, right?
Sure.
So you tripping over a rock, for example, right? So if you trip over a rock, no one is going to say that's like, how should I put this? No one's going to say that's an immoral action, right? You tripping over a rock is not something which is immoral, especially if it's unintentional, right? And so the idea is simply that the reason as to why that's not immoral is because the action of you tripping over a rock does not violate or compromise any specific sufficient property which determines an action being immoral. So it's not violating any of the relevant properties in the correct first order ethical theory which determines the morality of an action.
But what part of that is supposed to be the normative function?
The normative function is the relation between the action and its participation in the property which is a sufficient condition for an action to be moral or moral, depending on the first order ethical theory. Yeah.
Sufficient condition for the action to be
If this
moral.
clarification does not work, I have at least 10 other different means that can clarify this. So I'm not even worried about you still being confused after like a horror, for example. So I'm just making it clear. It's not gibberish. It's intelligible, and you'll get there once I just further clarify if you need any further clarifications.
Well, it could also be that it's intelligible and I don't get there. Like I'm sure that physicists have concepts that are intelligible and I'm not getting there anytime soon. Okay, normative
Mm-hmm.
function. So I think I wrote this correctly. Let's just make sure I've written it correctly, and then I'm going to think about it if I've written it right. Relation between action
Gotcha.
and its participation in the property, which is a sufficient condition for the action to be moral or immoral.
Yeah.
Okay, let's think about that. So it's a relation, I guess. So
I don't
norm.
want to derail. I don't want to derail, by the way. I'm going to make this clear. You'd agree on this, right? So, would you agree that for any given moral fact X, for instance, right? The moral fact is going to be reflective of what is permissible or what we ought or ought not to do. You'd agree with this, right? Just trivially, right?
Reflective of
Whether or
what?
not it is preferences based or something like that is irrelevant. We're not talking about the metaphysical profile of moral facts. We're just talking about what the moral facts are from a semantical profile perspective, right? So when I say something is moral, all I mean there is that it is good or it is something which is okay, it's permissible. When I say
I
something is immoral, excuse me, sorry,
if you're
you
basically
want to say something,
asking,
right?
if you're basically yes, I'm trying to answer what you asked, if I understand you correctly. If you're basically
Okay,
asking
cool.
when if I'm taking moral to be like a synonym for good or something like that, then yeah, I'm taking those to be
Hmm.
synonyms. Immoral, bad, same thing. Yeah.
Okay, and so you'd agree that there's a necessary connection between determining the moral facts and a theory of normative ethics or a first order ethical theory, which basically assesses the conditions for determining the moral facts, irrespective of the metaphysical profile assessments.
Okay,
Right? You'd agree on this.
I could think about that, but I want to think about the one that you gave me earlier because it seemed I felt like I might be able to get a foothold on that. So is it okay if I just try to deal with this one that I've
Oh, it
got
ties
written
back
here?
to it actually. It ties back to it because it's going to clarify the thing that you want clarification on,
Well, wait.
which is about the participation relation
I'm
stuff.
not sure I've
What's
processed
up?
this. I'm not sure I've processed the sentence yet. So just let me process the sentence. But if you think
Okay.
that you've got
Mm-hmm.
some pathway that's going to work for making it clear, I'm happy to go down that.
Got you.
Okay, relation between action and so it's a relation between action
Yeah.
and its participation in the property. And one second,
The
relation.
relation is just a participation,
Well,
right?
okay, just one second. You have to just understand. I go really slowly. Like in school, I had like an IEP or a like personal education plan thing that gave me extra test time because I don't think that fast. I need like time, so maybe more than the average person to think things through. If it ever doesn't seem like that, it's just because I know the topic well, but I need time. So we got to slow down.
Okay, got you.
Relation between action and its participation in the property, which is a sufficient condition for the action to be moral or immoral. So I guess one part of this that I'm already confused by is
Wait, sorry. Avi had me laughing for a moment.
Isaac managed to convince his school to give him extra time on tests for being retarded. Yeah, I mean, okay, well, that's a whole thing. But yes. Okay, so normative function. Okay, so one thing I'm confused about
Okay.
here is what it means to participate in a property. That is confusing to me. What is participating in a property? I think things have properties.
So just a satisfactory relation. So there are case scenarios where, let's say you're utilitarian, for instance, right? Let's just stipulate utilitarianism. I'm not a utilitarian, neither are you, but let's just stipulate utilitarianism, okay? So if we have an action like, let's say, genocide in half of the population without there being any clear benefits, that action is immoral because of the fact that that specific action satisfies a property with respect to the correct normative ethical theory, which entails it being immoral. And so that causes the normative function.
Okay.
But if it does not violate any property relevant to the correct normative ethical theory, which determines the moral facts in the actual world, then it is not the case that the action is participating in any such thing that I'm talking about currently.
Okay. I'm I'm sorry. I know you keep saying a lot of stuff, and I'm always hung up on basic parts.
That's fine.
Participation.
As I've told you numerous times, you don't have to be repeating yourself. I have no issue or qualms with this. You can ask me clarifying questions, and I'm willing to clarify every single word I use in my specific.
Okay, well,
Usually,
I
people are
appreciate
scared
that.
to clarify their points is because they're dishonest or they're just saying a whole bunch of jargons which they don't even know the definitions of. But
That
that's
I
not
agree
me, so I have
with.
no issue clarifying.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that I agree with for sure.
yeah,
Okay, so yeah, I'm trying to understand participation in a property. I understand what it means
yeah.
to have a property. Is it the same thing as having a property?
I don't know what you mean by having the property.
Like the
Like
sun
now, I'm
has
gonna
the
be the one
property
asking the
of
clarifying question, right?
like the sun has the property of being yellow. You have the property of being human.
I'm taking that to just mean satisfactory relation, so yes. Hmm.
Okay,
So it satisfies that condition, right? Kind of like how you reference satisfaction relation in some deflationist position. Yeah, so yeah, of course it has the property, yeah. So it possesses that property,
okay.
right?
So it's
Yeah.
fair to say that participating in property is the same thing as having a property.
Yes,
Okay,
perfect.
right. Having a property. Okay, so let me see this. I'm just gonna, like, this thing that I'm copying in text, I'm just gonna kind of keep copying, pasting it until I sort of get down a few layers and understand what's going on. So we're gonna do normative
Okay.
function again down here, but this time we're gonna say has the property, and we're gonna see what that does to the sentence. Okay, so normative function is the relation between action and it and the property it okay, let me fix this. I think I probably know how to phrase this. And the property
Mm-hmm.
it has, like this. So a normative function
Yeah.
is the relation between action and the property it has, which is a sufficient condition for the action to be moral or immoral.
Yes.
Okay, let me try to think about that. So it's a relation
The
between an
second part or the last part of your sentence, which talks about sufficient condition for the action to be moral or immoral, that's just indexed and predicated upon what the correct normative ethical theory actually is. And the properties are the defining properties of said theory. So if it's utilitarianism, then the property would just be valences, for example, or whatever view you hold on well-being. Depends on if you're an objectivist theorist or something like that. So whatever position or whatever properties which defines the normative ethical theory, which is the correct one in the actual world, which determines the moral facts, would be the type of thing which is referenced by the last subsection of the sentence when you're talking about the sufficient condition for the action to be moral slash immoral, respectively. Just making that other clarification on the sideline before we move
so
forward.
so no, I'm like a one track mind. I
Mm-hmm.
get hung up on a thing and I have a hard time hearing more stuff. So that's not all landing, but I'm not trying to be rude. Normative function is
Okay,
the
that's fine.
relation between an action and the property it has, which is a sufficient condition for the action to be moral or immoral. So is normative function just, is all that means just that it has some
Mm-hmm.
property that renders it immoral under some normative theory?
Under the correct normative theory, not just some, because you could have like more than one
Sure.
normative theories where some of them are incorrect. So it has to be the correct one. If it's not the correct one, then it's not morally relevant because it's not talking about the actual thing which determines the moral facts in the real world, which is what me and you are trying to assess here in this conversation regarding killing animals being moral or immoral. Okay? Yeah.
Okay, so let me try rewriting this. I will keep kind of crunching it down and down until I get it into something that
Mm-hmm.
is clear for me.
That's fine.
So, relation between an action and the property it has, which is a sufficient condition for the action to be moral or immoral. So, normative function is just basically whether it has property that renders it immoral under correct normative theory. Is that correct as I've written it there, the final one?
Hold on, let me just read this real quick. Normative function, whether it has the property that renders it moral under correct normative theory. Yeah, that's correct.
Okay. Is normative function just the property that renders it immoral under the correct normative theory?
No, it's having the property.
Having the normative, so a normative function.
So you could have an action. You could have an action which does not stand in relation to the property, right? But there exists the property that you're trying to compare the action to. So it's not just, oh, there is a property, right? It has to possess the property, which is why I talked about the participation stuff and whatever, and we have just mentioned a while ago. Yeah. So.
Okay, so
Mhm.
how about this one here at the end? A normative function is having property that renders it immoral under under correct normative theory.
Yes, under the
Okay,
correct normative.
that
Yeah.
might be enough. So let me try to think about that in the context of NTT. So basically, you're saying
Hmm.
animals lack a property that renders it immoral to slice their throats under the correct normative theory, whereas humans have that property.
Yes, and that's the trait.
Okay, right. So that makes
Not
sense.
universally, but not universally, but generally speaking. Generally, at the very least, under normal standard conditions, that's the case. You
Okay,
could perhaps create some very weird hypothetical world where, as I say, oh, if I stab this animal in the throat, basically, every single human being on planet Earth is gonna die. Would you do it? And the answer is no. That would be immoral. But it's not the case that this reflects the standard normal conditions that we're talking about, right? Just making that also clear on the sideline, right?
So, okay. So, what it looks like to me right now is I'm not sure that that answer is informative. So, you can tell me if I've got that wrong, but the way I'm under
Before you give the reasons as to why it is not informative or why you believe it is not informative, what do you mean by informative?
I don't think it. I don't know that it adds further. I don't know that it adds any information that isn't contained in the question.
Does not add. So by uninformative, you just mean it does not add information that isn't already contained in the question.
Yeah, I think it might be uninformative or like close to uninformative, where it's maybe providing a bit of information about how your theory works, but ultimately just like it's going to be like pretty much just rephrasing things that are already stated in the question under your moral view. So, like when I look at this, having property that renders it immoral under correct normative theory. So I feel like that's what
Yeah.
I'm asking about in the first place. I think I'm like you could almost if I was going to ask NTT to someone with your kind of view, I guess that the way it would be expressed is like what's the property that animals lack which humans have such that if they lack that property, it would be ethical to slice their throats.
Okay. And so you're saying that given that specifically, it is uninformative, correct? Okay.
We don't need to
So I
focus
want to
on
get clear on a
whether
couple of
it's we
things.
don't need to focus on like I'm not saying that as a criticism. It might be like informative in some small way, like maybe it says sort of something about how you think about normative ethics, like maybe it conveys that you think
Okay.
about it in terms of properties and stuff like this. But it's not getting at the thing that I'm trying to get at because
Yeah,
what
I know.
I'm
That's the first layer response. What I expected you to do basically when I gave that initial response is just for it to ask me, okay, now tell me what specifically would that property be, and then that's just going to go into a debate about a theory of normative ethics, and then I can just
um
give studies support to my position on normative ethics, and that's fine.
well, I
So
don't
that's where it really becomes very, very substantive. But this is just the first layer response to the question, which is basically me pointing out that because usually, just to be clear on this, right, and you'd agree with this, majority of people who you have a conversation with, where you ask them that question about the NTT, usually what happens is they appeal to intelligence. That's not something which has a normative function insofar as it is relating to the correct normative ethical theory, right? And so that's going to be an empirical trait in most cases. Like they're usually appealing to biological traits, which is empirical. I'm pointing out that the trait is not an empirical trait. It's not an empirical distinction, but rather it's a distinction which lies in the domain of normative function. It's a functional trait, not an empirical trait.
well,
So maybe you want to make the argument, real quickly, maybe you want to make the argument that this is uninformative in the sense you're thinking of. But it depends on if the person who's asking the question is presupposing that the morally relevant trait is something empirical, which I don't believe it is empirical. I believe it is functional. Okay?
what I'm I guess trying to get at is I see that you're saying that the normative function is the trait. And basically, what that comes down to is you're saying the trait is some property that animals possess that humans possess that animals don't possess
Yeah.
that renders killing them ethical under the correct normative theory. But I think that that is basically just what I'm asking you. So what I'm trying to find out is what is that property? Like you said, what is that property that animals lack that
Real
humans
quickly, before
have?
you real quickly, is it the case that when someone responds by saying intelligence, even though you don't believe that's a trait which results in a non-absurd slash non-contradictory entailment or consequence, do you believe when they give that response, they are given a trait, whether or not it is successful against the NTT?
I'm fine with that as an answer. but I
Okay,
don't.
not
Yeah.
insofar as you're fine with it, insofar as it results in a non-absurd or a non-contradictory entailment,
Oh
but
no,
you're
no.
fine with that as an answer insofar as it would be a trait, even if you don't believe it to be morally relevant, correct?
Yeah, I'm fine with that. You're sorry. Well, if you don't want me to phrase it
Okay,
like that, like yeah, I can take that as a trait.
and just to be clear on this, right? Would you say that when you're talking about the correct normative ethical theory, we're just talking about, I guess, the available theories in philosophy and normative ethics, or
Okay,
like,
I'll say
what are you
something about
talking?
that. I'll say something about that, which is
Yeah,
I'm actually not focusing on that part like at all because really it's a kind of internal critique. Like I'm just whatever your theory is, we'll just go with that. I'm not going to argue at all about whether it is in fact like the correct normative theory or something like that. We're just looking at what kind of consequences we get on your normative theory, whatever it may be, whether it's correct or not.
correct normative ethics. So you're not looking at what is the correct normative ethical theory, but you're looking at the consequences.
I'm not concerned with whether your normative theory is correct or not. The only reason for the terminology correct normative theory is because you used it in one of your
Hold on a
definitions.
second.
I
Wait,
yeah,
hold on a second.
sure.
So you're not concerned with the correctness of the normative ethical theory. Is it the case that the NTT is
Wait, sorry, just one second.
hold on a second. I don't want to forget what I was going to ask. You can make your point afterwards. The NTT, is that specific script or argument or question, whatever you want to categorize it as? Is it
Dialogue
something
process.
which is usually, hold on, is it something which is usually in the process of assessing the morality of an action, or no?
Okay, what I want to say is that I don't feel like there's any need to talk about that. I feel like we can talk about
Hold
the
on.
well,
I thought you were talking about ethics.
well, just one second.
Okay.
I don't see why answering that. Like, I mean, I think it should be obvious. I'm pretty happy to answer questions, but I also kind of want to stay on track. And if it's not obvious to me that a question is actually necessary in order to answer the
Mm-hmm.
question that I have on the table, then I'm sort of not inclined to go down that road because it just feels like we're going to open up some side tangent. And just about correct normative theory, to be clear, that's not language that I'd ever really use when running NTT. It's just correct normative theory was part of one of these definitions you gave somewhere. So it came up because that was language you used. But I'm not actually, when I'm running NTT, focusing at all on whether your normative theory is correct or something like that. Like
But
it
you're
can,
focusing on ethics, correct? You're focusing on ethics, right?
I guess that I object to how you're proceeding in the conversation. I don't really like that it's
Hold
sort of,
on.
yeah.
But we agreed on the same definition on ethics, or what it means for something to be moral slash immoral. We're having an ethical discourse. We have clarified and confirmed this on numerous different occasions. And so it just kind of is perplexing to me how you're going to participate in an ethical conversation about what would determine this action being moral or whether or not this action is moral without having a normative ethical position, which is a necessary condition for determining the morality of actions to which you've agreed on in the same conversation. You agreed that we have to have this specific thing, which would be the fixing conditions for determining the morality of an action. So how can you ignore one aspect and pay attention to the other aspect if they're inextricably tied to one another? That's what I'm really confused about.
So we might be at a roadblock because I'm going to put my feet in the ground here and not answer that unless it's in some way necessary to answer the question I'm asking. And if you're also going to put your feet in the ground and say I insist on an answer to that, then I think we're at a bit of an impasse.
Okay, so hold on a second. I didn't hear what you were saying because I was busy responding to a retard in the chat. Could you
I
repeat it, please,
yeah,
and thank you?
it's honestly so like I do it too, so I can't criticize you for it. I like always get triggered by the chat, but we should all just make a rule of fucking never reading the chat. No, I was just
Yeah.
I was just saying that although if the person you're responding to is Avi, I definitely don't think Avi's a retard. But you know his IQ is like in the like 2 standard deviations above the mean. He's like one of the smartest people I know. But you might not be talking to him. Yeah, so
Okay.
what I was saying is that from my perspective, it seems like you're asking things that aren't necessary to answer NTT. Like what the question I'm asking you is NTT, and I'm trying to understand your reply to that, and that's the road I want to go down. And it feels like you're asking me things which are not necessary to go down that road. So I'm
Well, the road
planting.
that I would
Just
go
can
down
I
is
just
just going to go
finish?
into normative ethics.
Let me just finish my
Yeah.
point. So I'm just planting my feet in the ground here, and I'm saying I'm not going to answer that unless you can, if you want to show it's somehow necessary for you to answer the previous question I asked, then I would humor that. But otherwise, I'm going to plant my feet in the ground. And if you also sort of plant your feet in the ground and you're like, well, I'm not going to continue unless you answer so and so, then I think we're at an impasse, and that would just be sort of
I'm not
we
going to
just
do
end the
that.
conversation
I
there.
always try to evade or ignore impasses at all costs. Even if it means for me to answer my opponent's question, even if it came after my question or it's not relevant to the conversation. But what I would like to say is one thing. So you're saying that you want to go down the road regarding what I think the trait actually is, and of course, that road is going to fundamentally boil down to my normative ethical theory, just basically that relevant property about my theory, which I think is correct. That's really just it. Justice is one of them, of course. I think that there's not a justice violation, or I don't. I think that, well, that's one of the virtues, of course, but that's a vague virtue. I can give a more specific virtue. Um, I think that specifically, as well as the consequences of eating animals, is something which is not compromised at the result or at the sake of allowing the consumption of animals. So it's going to boil back down to my theory of normative ethics, really.
Okay, so I'm
Yeah.
trying to kind of understand what the trait is. So I'm just writing a bit here. I heard justice is one of the things. And then there's
Yeah.
something about consequences.
Lack of violation of any of the virtues or any of the main virtues in virtue consequentialist position, which is the correct normative ethical theory, which I have justification.
Lack of. Okay, wait. So does that encompass justice, or is justice a separate thing?
Yeah, it encompasses justice. Yes, it does not compromise or violate the justice virtue criterion.
Okay, so lack of violation of virtue consequentialism. Was that what you said?
Yeah.
Okay, we might be making some progress. So the trait is a lack of violation of virtue consequentialism. So I can't say that I've heard of this view. What is the virtue consequentialism?
Well, virtue consequentialism, just simply defined, is just going to be a theory which states that the morality of an action is determined by the virtues primarily in conjunct with the consequences of the given action. We prioritize virtue assessment. However, if you're at a virtue impasse, for example, then you can appeal to consequences. It's kind of like threshold deontology in some sense, right? You get what I mean right there.
It's yeah,
Right, so you have a threshold, and if there's an impasse, you have like a next layer assessment of the ethical facts.
so it's
Yeah.
yeah, it's some I'm understanding it roughly as some kind of fusion between virtue ethics and consequentialism.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So yeah, then I think the way that I would want to proceed is I would just again similar to what I did with the
Asking for the justification for it, or no?
not exactly. Similar to what I did with the normative function thing. How I just rephrase that to then be in terms of your ethical theory. Like, okay, well, if what that's all about is a property, then let's just phrase NTT. What is the property such that animals lack that humans have such that it's ethical? So now we're talking about virtue consequentialism. So
The
I
lack of
guess I'm gonna
violation property,
yeah. So
right? When you say, just to be clear, when you say the word property, just to make sure we're on the same semantical page here, what's your definition of property here?
okay. Sorry again. I just want to continue with what I was saying. So I want
Okay,
to
then I'll just re-ask you the same question. That's fine.
okay, we yeah, I mean if we get into that kind of thing we might might hit an impasse, but yeah, so what I'm trying to understand now is I want to ask name the trait with respect to this thing that you're giving, which is lack of violation of virtue consequentialism. So what exactly is it that's true of animals? Sorry, true. Yeah, what is it that animals lack that humans have, such that if humans lost it, it would no longer be a violation of virtue consequentialism to slit their throats.
What is it that humans lack that animals? Sorry,
Other way
repeat the
around, but
question,
yeah,
please. I was zoning out completely.
that's
Yeah, I
that's
was looking
okay.
at the DM action.
It's yeah, so it's just
Mm-hmm.
just NTT, but I'm phrasing it just every time you kind of clarify your view, I'm just rephrasing NTT in terms of the view as I understand it. So right now I'm asking,
Okay,
what is
good.
it that that animals lack that humans have, such that if humans lacked it, it would no longer be a violation of virtue consequentialism to slit their throats?
That would go back to the lack of violation property.
No, but that's what I'm asking about. So you're saying in one
You're
case it's a,
asking you're asking for the empirical traits of the humans, or
I don't want to say anything necessarily empirical. It could be some other kind of thing, but I'm just saying what what is it that animals lack that humans have, such that if humans lacked it, it wouldn't be a violation of virtue consequentialism to slit their throats. And if you respond to that with something like, well, it being a violation of virtue consequentialism, that would be repeating that's what I would mean by uninformative, because it would just be repeating stuff that's contained in the question.
okay, so you're asking me specifically amongst the differences between humans and animals, which specific difference or which specific property within that set of differential properties would result in there being a lack of violation?
That's not exactly how I phrased it, but it sounds like you're close enough that what you say will probably be an answer, but I'll say it again just for clarity's sake. I'm saying, what is
Okay.
it that animals lack that humans have, such that if humans lacked it, it would no longer be a violation of virtue consequentialism to slit their throats?
Okay, so I would say that with respect to that, right? I would say that that would rest into some sort of like distinction in value properties, right? So it's going to be a moral value property distinction.
Okay, so what is it that animals lack that humans have, such that if humans lacked it, it wouldn't be a moral value property, the violation to slash their throats?
So it would be the collection. Well, I don't want to say the collection of facts because then you're going to be asking me which specific collection of facts, right? So what I would say with respect to that specific question is to say that the thing which makes it the case that there's a morally relevant distinction between the humans and the animals as it pertains to the moral value distinction is going to be based on the human's impact the causal impact that one action has on the moral facts.
The causal impact. Okay, so the trait is the causal impact that. One second, let me just think about how to phrase this then. You'll just have to give me a minute to think about my phrasing.
Logical.
Thanks. Yeah, so I guess I'd say the same thing. So, like, what is it that animals lack that humans have, such that if humans lacked it, it wouldn't have the kind of causal impact that you find, like, morally objectionable?
Wait, hold on a second. To clarify, or to just really clarify what you're doing here,
Sure.
it seems to be the case that what the question or the line of interrogation you're going under is just the same of asking, oh, you presented a trait. Well, what's the trait of that trait which makes there be a difference? And then you do the same thing infinitely, which is not to deny or to basically point out an absence of there being a trait being referenced. There was a relevant trait, which is informative. However, you're just continuously asking what's the trait of that given trait, which makes there being a distinction.
I don't know if I exactly agree with that
Seems like an infinite
formulation.
prolong of the conversation.
I
Sorry,
don't.
excuse me.
I
I
don't.
don't want to straw man you or anything, but that's just what it comes off as, right? Just making
I
that pretty clear.
I don't know if I exactly agree with that formulation, but I can tell you what I'm trying to do, which is I'm trying to actually get to a point that I can identify which frame in the trade equalization process is where the value drops off. So whenever you give me
Wait,
an, just let me finish.
where you can identify the frame?
Sorry, just 1 second. So I'm trying.
Okay.
What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to get to a point that I can understand, at least roughly, where in the trade equalization process value drops off. Now, if someone gives me an answer that, from my point of view, doesn't inform me as to where that frame is, right? Maybe it's clear from their point of view, but say it's not clear from mine. To take a trivial case, say they say, well, it's where in the frame where value drops off, right? I'm going
Okay.
to basically rephrase the question such that I'm asking now in terms of the answer they gave, but the goal is always just to get an understanding of what that frame actually is. So anytime basically that you give me an answer where I can't figure out what the frame is, I'm going to sit there and think about it for a minute and figure out how to
Mm-hmm.
rephrase it such that I can get that frame.
Okay. And so there are certain things you've mentioned a while ago which needs a bit of clarification. So remember when we talked in the previous conversation we had a couple of days ago about understanding? Are you saying you don't understand the trait of reference with respect to virtue consequentialism?
I'm saying that I don't know the frame. I can't tell what frame in the TEP, even roughly, it drops off. Right now, it could be anywhere in the TEP.
Oh, hold on there a second. So you're not saying that it is the case that you don't understand it, but you're saying that it is the case that you don't know what it is.
I'm saying that, excuse me, I'm saying that I don't understand where in the TEP, as in which frame, at least roughly, value drops off in. And that's what I'm trying to understand. So
Okay,
I'm looking for you to
so
give me something that helps me
where in the
understand what frame.
TEP?
Yeah.
So the so not is it the case that not understanding where in the TEP the value drops off at is something which necessarily entails not understanding the trait itself?
So
Why can't you
again,
understand the trait without understanding where in the TEP it drops off at? Where's the contradiction?
I'm going to be a bit picky. I'm going to be a bit of a stick in the mud, and I'm just going to say I'm not really going to answer these things that I don't understand to be relevant, right? Like what I'm trying to do is just to understand which frame it is.
Hold on. So, because remember, this whole dialogue we're having here is to meet the challenge that you propose towards me. One of the
Yes.
challenges being that I give a response which, or give a trait, because remember we had this back and forth about what you mean by response. It's to give a trait which you understand, which is neither contradictory nor absurd.
Well,
Now, I gave, wait, real quickly, because I gave a definition of the trait I was referencing, and they're given at least three different semantical layers after you've repeatedly asked for definitions and clarifications. So, it's not the case that it's relevant whether or not you identify that exact margin or that exact spot in the trait equalization process where the value drops off at for it to understand the trait, which I've clarified, which is neither absurd, contradictory, or uninformative, which would meet the actual condition of the challenge you've given initially.
so I would just be basically repeating the same thing. And if you don't want to go down that road for whatever reason, that's fine and I'll respect that. But I'm trying to understand where in the trade equalization process value drops off.
Okay, so I don't want to be the picky guy, but in this case, I kind of have to because of the fact that I think I'm really justified in doing such. I think asking someone what is the trait specifically, or asking them what's the sufficient condition or whatever like that, in this case of the NTT, I think that's, even though that has some sort of trait equalization process baked into it, the trait equalization process does not require any specificity of the margin. It just requires the understanding of what trait is being played in the role of determining the moral fact about killing the animals. So it's kind of reframing the question, but reframing the question at the cost of modifying the question, which is modifying the challenge which you proposed towards me to actually meet in this debate or conversation this far.
Do you understand what I'm trying to get from you though, right?
I understand what you're trying to get at, but what
Yes.
I'm saying is what you're trying to get at currently, real quickly, what you're trying to get at currently is not the same as the challenge that was being proposed originally. Get it? It's not the same thing. They're different things, right? So for example, I'll give you like one instance, right? So we can give conditions. We can give conditions for what specifically would determine, let's say, I don't know, like a heap of sand or something like that, like a condition. Uh, or that's just one example. I don't like that example, but let's just rock with the example for the time being. And this condition is sufficient. It's actually a sufficient condition, which is what the trade actually would be talking about, even if the condition itself is something which is vague in some sense, it's conceptually vague, or there's no specific margin.
Well,
No, I'm
I
not.
don't
I'm given the
really.
condition which meets the trait condition, right? I'm not giving you like a dumb trait like intelligence, which requires, or sorry, which justifies the killing of Down syndrome people, or let's say clinical retards, for instance. I'm not given a speciesism type trait, for example, where I'm indexing it to the biological species. I'm giving you a trait which, by the way, is understandable, right? It's something which I've given definitions of. It's understandable, is something which you've displayed understand enough, which is neither contradictory nor absurd. Now, even if you want to say that you want to spot that specific gold standard, right, which within that specific trait, that's irrelevant to you understanding the trait generally or holistically, which determines the moral fact.
Well, the way I'm interpreting it is it sounds like we're at an impasse because I'm telling you what I'm looking for, and it sounds like you don't want to answer that question. Is that unfair, or is that correct?
I don't think it is unfair what you're doing right now, insofar as
Sorry, when I
your
said
framing of the
unfair,
con. Sorry.
I just meant I
Yeah.
wasn't talking about my procedure in the conversation. I was just asking if my framing right
Okay.
there was unfair.
Okay, you're framing of like what's going on
What
currently.
my framing is in, I said it seems to me like we're at an impasse because I'm trying to ask you a certain kind of question, and the impression I'm getting is that you don't want to answer that question.
Yeah, I think we're at an impasse in some sense because now you're asking for something else. At least given my understanding, which is completely justified one more time again. It comes off as a regurgitation of the previous things we've talked about justification of interpretations of what you're saying. But in this case, right, and I can clarify, or you can have the last word, or I can have the last word. I think I've met the challenge. I think I've succeeded the challenge, given how you framed the question and what we were talking about previously in the chat. Doesn't matter if you're someone who is not satisfied by the response, so long as the response is not absurd, and by response again I mean trait. I'm not going under the other definition. So long as the trait is not absurd, it's not contradictory, and it's not uninformative, and it's something which you understand, then I've met the challenge. That's it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I would just say the same thing, which is that what I'm trying to understand is the point in the trade equalization process where value drops off. So I can understand someone looking at NTT and, for instance, thinking, oh, it's a reply to say the trade is the point where value drops off or something like that. And to go, oh, well, I have provided something and you understand what was said. So,
Mm-hmm.
like, technically, I've answered your question. I would just say that that's pretty uncharitable. That's obviously not what I'm asking about. And I would rephrase in terms of what NTT has always been about, which is trying to understand
Uh,
where in the just let me finish, where in the trade equalization process value drops off. Now, if you just say that you're unwilling to answer that question, I'll accept that. That's fine. And let's just be clear: is that what you're saying? That you're just unwilling to answer?
yeah, based on how it's being framed. And by the way, when you continue your point, I'll basically clarify as to why I think I'm definitely justified in this dialectical approach. So continue what you're saying.
The only thing I didn't like was the based on how it's framed. Like, so this I'm just looking for a
Okay.
yes or no, and I think your answer is yes. To be clear,
Okay.
what I'm trying to
Just to address some things, by the way, it's not really. I think the conversation for the main part is finished. But just to clarify a couple of things for the recording, and of course for the inept bastards in the chat, right, who might have an issue with my response, with all due respect, actually, with no respect. But if I'll give you like an example, which you can even participate in or not. So if I ask you, for instance, what's the relevant distinguishing trait between, let's say, I don't know, like a bachelor and an unmarried man, and bachelor and a married man. Sorry, a bachelor and a married man. You refer to marriage. So the distinguishing trait is marriage, and then I continuously ask you questions about that specific trait to spot the specific line, right? Whereas marriage becomes unmarriage and vice versa, right? Or whereas a man becomes married or he does not become married, even if the person is the type of person who is unable to give you the conditions for what determines marriage or unmarried, or sorry, or lack of marriage, respectively, I think just you asking them what the trait actually is, and they respond by saying absence of marriage in contrast with actual marriage, would be something which responds to the question which is asking for the trait, which is what your original question was. And so I don't want you to paint it as if, and I'm not saying you're doing this or interrupt, but I don't want you to paint it as if I'm giving an uninformative response, I'm being uncharitable, I'm being pedantic, but rather I've met the challenge of you asking me what the trait actually is, while giving numerous different clarifications, definitions, and have been demonstrably patient through the entirety of this conversation, whilst at the same time remaining logically consistent and not compromising your common sense moral intuitions.
Well, this is the thing with uninformative. There's things that are they literally add no information. For instance, if someone says which car, like we're looking out at the parking lot, we're going to get into your car to go home, and one person says which car is yours, and the other guy says, well, the car that's mine. That doesn't provide any information, right? That doesn't tell you anything that's not contained in the question. We already know that there's a car that belongs to you, and we haven't gotten any clearer to knowing which it is.
That's
So,
analogous.
well, just let me continue, because the whole point I'm making right now is why I'm being careful about saying completely uninformative. Now, it could be that some information is provided, for instance. It could be that some of the information provided in the answer is about how you think about ethics or about what your normative theory is or something like this. Excuse me. Sorry, I drank a big fucking smoothie before this. So I wouldn't say completely uninformative in that sense, but one sense in which it is completely uninformative is with respect to clarifying where in the TEP values lost. So I suspect, let me, this is going to be a while, so just let me get through this one. This one's a bit longer. So I suspect that there's going to be a pretty common read of this conversation. And I think that that read is going to be basically that you entered this conversation and went through it, well, in one way or another, not necessarily maliciously, but in one way or another, avoiding actually answering the thing that NTT proponents want to understand, which is where in the trade equalization process values lost. And I think uncharitably, if I'm going to be honest, I think uncharitably focusing on some specific phrasing that occurred at some point, I don't know exactly what was said, but you know, it's kind of understood. Like, we're not asking for things that don't tell us about where in the TEP. When we're talking about traits, we're talking about things that actually clarify where in the trade equalization process values lost. You could give a trait that is uninformative in the sense of not giving any further information as to where in the trade equalization process values lost. But everyone kind of knows that that's what vegans are actually asking about. And if you had have prompted me to, you know, in the same way as the last conversation, if you had have prompted me with like, hey, would you by trait, you know, count things that don't actually give any indication of where in the trade equalization process values lost? I'd be like, no, of course not. So I don't necessarily think that it's a unreasonable interpretation. I could see how you would answer like that, but I think basically everyone is going to view this as not really meeting the challenge, and I think they're right in viewing it that way. So I guess I would just kind of end
I
by
think everyone in this server, but I don't think everyone over.
Just let me finish.
Okay, got you. Finished?
Yeah. So sorry. Just let me regain my train of thought. So yeah, I mean, I think I would just kind of give you sort of a final chance to not end up in that category of everyone just sort of saying that you dodged the point by answering. So I'll just ask it again. And the question is really, can you tell me what's true of animals, such that if true of humans, it would be ethical to slice their throats? And the answer there is supposed to give some clarity as to where in the trade equalization process values lost. It's not meant to be uninformative with respect to where in the trade equalization process values lost. I think that's well understood for many years among people who've run NTT.
Yeah, so I mean, this thing is kind of like you're doing this thing where now it's kind of getting infuriating. Not to say that you're being bad faith, but it's like I'd admire if I'd really appreciate if you do not interrupt me, because when I interrupted you a while ago, you told me not to, right? It's where you would have a specific framing of the question, right? And we would go over the clarifications and so forth. And then afterwards, you would either philosophically frame my response as something which is uninformative or trivial, or make it so that, okay, well, what I always meant was this, right? Now, with respect to the NTT, right, you gave the car example. Of course, the response I've given is far more informative, because what you mean when you're asking me what is the trait is not identical to any of that normative function stuff I said regarding virtue consequentialism. It's a lot more. So my answer to your question, just first and foremost from the get-go, is adding a lot more information. to what the question is even asking for. Because when you're talking about traits, you're not thinking of freaking virtue consequentialism, dude. You're not thinking of any of that stuff. That's not what the question is identical to semantically. So it would be unfair and uncharitable, as you'd like to call it, to think that that specific thing is something which is uninformative. Now, to address the other parts of what you said, multiple times, and this is how I know that the people in the chat are coping. Multiple times when you run the NTT script in someone, like what's the trait, for instance, and they appeal to lack of intelligence or lack of moral agency, they don't proceed to ask what specific moment or what specific point in the trait equalization process as it pertains to moral agency is it the case that value is lost. No, what they do instead is immediately give a reductio because they know what moral agency actually means, right? Likewise, you know what I mean when I'm talking about virtue consequentialism and the properties of such, right? So just like in the case I've given, whereas there's no need for me to basically ask you what specifically or where in the moral agency trait would the value be dropped off at due to me understanding what moral agency actually means. The same thing applies here. But the reason as to why people who runs the NTT will not ask that question the moment the person appeals to moral agency is because that specific thing that they understand by definition, given what it actually means, they know what that thing actually means. The reason why they don't ask that following up question is because there's an obvious absurd consequence from doing such or from admitting to that trait which they do in fact understand. The same thing does not apply here. The trait which I've given, which you do in fact understand given the definitional access you have to the trait, does not lead to an absurd consequence, whereas you just run a reductio like that. So just to summarize everything, right? If you compare the intelligence trait or the moral agency trait, to be very specific, with the trait I've given, they're both things we understand by definition, but in one case, you're not going to be asking, oh, where specifically in this trait would the value be dropped off at, because of the fact that you believe that there's definitely an absurd consequence, because you know the trait, or you understand the trait. In this case scenario of the virtue consequentialism trait I've given, you understand the trait, but because you're unable to give a reductio or an absurd consequence from the trait, or unable to demonstrate a logical contradiction from that trait specifically, you end up prolonging the question, you end up prolonging the interrogation about what the trait actually is, despite understanding the trait to a sufficient degree, which would make it the case that it is no longer unintelligible. You can respond now.
You understand that everything you've said is 100% uninformative with respect to the specific question of where in the trait equalization process value is lost, right?
Sorry, continue. Like, could you repeat yourself, please?
Sure. You understand that everything you've said in this conversation is 100% uninformative with respect to the specific question of where in the trait equalization process value is lost, right?
Would that apply to if I give the response of moral agency?
I don't understand why I would need to answer that for you to answer what I just asked.
Hold on, I'm pointing out the absurd consequence of the premise of the question, right? Because remember, originally, you granted intelligence being a trait. It's something which is informative. You granted that to be a trait, even though I believe it is absurd or something which leads to contradictions. But again, with intelligence, I'm not going into the specific part where the values dropped off and I just give one trait and that's it. So what makes intelligence informative, but what makes intelligence as a trait informative, but my trait uninformative? Tell me.
Again, I'm just not going to answer those things. I'm staying on the track that I'm on. So what I'm asking you
I think we can
is,
just end things off here. I think we can just end this. I think that question I've just asked
wait a sec. Just wait a sec. You understand that nothing you've said in this conversation gives me any clarity as to where in the trait equalization process value is lost, right? Like, I'm not any closer to understanding what frame.
That's what I'm struggling to understand. How is it the case that the response I've given is not giving you any sort of close epistemic access to the answer you're looking for? Wait, hold on. I'm still in the midst of asking the question, right? So let me just finish because you complained about interrupting.
Wait. But I really don't like that. I asked you something, and you're asking me something.
And I'm responding to the question.
But the answer has a yes or a no answer. So can you start with the yes or no and then elaborate?
I don't think it is a yes or no answer, actually.
But
I think the question is phrased as
a yes no question. It was a do you understand, like, so I asked, Do you agree that, so that's going to have a yes or no answer. Do you agree that,
I'm
no,
agnostic on the question you've asked previously. The most recent one about whether or not it is uninformed with respect to what you're looking for, I'm agnostic on that. I don't think it is the case that it would be yes, and I'm actually leaning towards a no, given certain potential inconsistencies within your belief system.
okay, well, wait, if you think the answer is no, then let's like try to
I
understand
said I'm
that
leaning
because,
towards a no. I'm saying I'm leaning towards a no. I'm not saying it
okay,
is a no.
okay, but if you lean towards a
Due to
no,
potential inconsistency.
yes, but if you lean towards a no, then it helped me understand. So I'm trying to understand where in the trade equalization process value is lost. Excuse me, I
Hold on there a
figured you would
second. Now we're going back to the other question, right? The most recent question is
just
if I understand if it is
you
uninformative, not
you
where
gotta
in the truth
stop.
equalization process.
It's really hard because you keep breaking my chains of questioning. Like just try to just stay on my train. Try not to start a new train. Just try to stay on the train that I'm on.
No,
So
I'm keeping you on the train. You just switched the
just
question.
just please, you lean towards thinking that you have given me some clarity as to where in the trade equalization process value is lost. So I'm currently in a place where I can't tell at all what frame it is. Can you help me understand which frame it is?
Okay, so I don't want to get off to the previous point because I think what you're doing is kind of like asking me a question, which is get off in the previous points, right? The most recent question was you asking me what specifically, or if I agree that my response, given what you're looking for,
Just
would be
forget about that.
uninformative.
Just I don't care about the answer to that. I just you understand I'm trying to get to the core of the issue, right? I don't want to get hung up on all these things. Just I'm trying to understand where in the trade equalization process value is lost. Now, if you were to just say I refuse to answer that, that would be one thing, and I'd just give my spiel about, okay, I think you're just not really meeting the challenge. I think that for many years it's been very clear that sometimes people give answers that are uninformative with respect to where in the trade equalization process value is lost, assuming that's what you're doing. Maybe it's not. And it's well understood how
Yeah, you're just
NTT
changing the
it's
conditions
just a
again.
second. It's well understood how NTT proponents are going to respond to that, which is by saying, well, the kind of answer that we're looking for, the kind of thing we're going to consider an answer to the question is something that actually gives us a sense of where in the trade equalization process value is lost. Now, it's not the case that every time someone frames NTT, they're going to provide that hedge, just like not every time that somebody frames the is-ought gap are they going to
And
provide
why is
the.
that?
Can I please, it's don't stop that, okay? It's frustrating. So just like with the is-ought gap, it's not the case that every time somebody asks the is-ought question or frames that problem that they're going to also mention, by the way, I'm not looking for the explosion answer, right? Like there's an answer where you just say, oh, well, the sky's blue and the sky isn't blue, therefore it's good that so and so I've crossed the is-ought gap. Like obviously we're not looking for an answer by explosion, but we're not going to say that every time we talk about the is-ought gap. And I think that, if you were to try to say, oh, these people, they didn't realize this like obvious kind of reply that someone could give, that will kind of fail you if you can just look over the history and see like years and years of them dealing with that particular problem when it comes up, right? So it's a kind of response that we're well aware of. And the standard thing that anyone who's competent with NTT is going to do is just say, well, by an answer, I'm talking about something that actually helps me isolate where in the trade equalization process value is lost. So I'm just going to put the question to you again. And if you just are really firm, I will not answer that, then we can end it there and you can have the last word for as long as you want. But again, can you actually give me an answer that helps me understand where in the trade equalization process value is lost?
Okay. And by where in the trade legalization process,
Which
I'm
frame?
not sure if you're talking about another trait of that trait or something else.
I'm talking about something that informs me which frame it is, roughly.
And what determines whether or not something informs you of this roughly? Like I don't even know what specifically informs asks of the person or not.
If I can go, that's the frame.
So what you're expecting is a response which makes you feel informed about the trait, correct?
I'm looking for a response that will allow me to identify which frame value is lost.
Okay, and I've given a response like that twice, which you believe is not informative.
Wait a
Just
second.
like,
Don't equivocate on
yeah,
informative, because remember, I'm not saying completely uninformative.
I'm
You
not
might have
equivocating. That's a straw man. I'm not equivocating. Where
if
did I equivocate in
if
my point a while
if
ago?
if if you're using uninformative to mean conveys absolutely no information, then that is equivocating. Or is that what you were
That's
doing
not
there?
what I'm saying. So
Okay.
no, I'm not. So just
Okay.
trash that claim. Thank you. I'm not equivocating. I'm not equivocating. What I'm
Okay.
saying here is
If you're using the
that
term in the same sense as me, then you're not equivocating. That's fine. But again,
yes,
we're not
and by
just
informative,
Apollo. I've become sensitive to the fact that, and again, I'm not trying to be rude, but it seemed like I know your strategy now. I understand that what you're trying to do is get away from just directly meeting the question. So basically everything you do, I'm just going to redirect until it becomes clear that you're just unwilling to answer the question, which I think everyone will think you kind of dodged out basically. So again,
well, this is kind of like
will
an
you
embarrassing, right?
well
Because like you're
just
interrupting me
again
midpoint, and then you
again
complain about interrupting me, right?
just well, then just be clear and just say I won't answer, and then I'll stop, because then I would think you're being at least very
So what
straightforward.
you're saying is be clear and say something which is a strawman of what is actually occurring to gain me optical points.
Well, wait.
Correct?
That does not
That's what you're
sound.
saying. Yeah, you want me
That
to
doesn't
say something
sound.
that you want
That
me to
no.
say?
That does not sound like what I'm saying. Like, let's just be
Yes,
clear.
it does. I think I've answered the
Let's
question
just
about in the criticalization process this would actually be
that
met, where the
again. If
value
the
drops off.
again
Mm-hmm.
has it helped me identify the frame?
No.
Okay, so you
Apparently,
haven't. That's
according to
what I'm
your
asking
testimony.
about. You're right, but that
Like what? Just like how if I give. Hold on, real quickly before you give a response, because you've been interrupting me the entire time. If I had a trait which is intelligible, and I was to communicate that trait to, let's say, a Down syndrome person or a rock, those two entities will never understand. We're in the trait equalization process. It would be the case that the value be dropped off. However, would that be a problem for my response? Would that make my response uninformative?
no, it's
Not in the
possible.
sense where people would believe it is
No. I'll
absurd.
grant that. Before you continue, because there's no point continuing if I agree with what you're
Okay.
saying, right? You can always cut in
Okay.
on me to agree. By the way, to cut me off if I'm making a point that I don't need to make.
Okay.
So it could be that you provide an answer that's informative, as in it clarifies what the frame is, and I somehow am failing to understand it. Totally possible. Regardless, I'm still trying to understand it, obviously, right? So
But
that's
you said I
kind of
did not answer the question, which presupposes I've not
when I
given that response.
you don't want to needle on these uncharitable interpretations. When I say hasn't answered, obviously what I'm saying is that as far as I can tell, there's not an answer. Could it be that actually you have provided an answer and I've misunderstood you? Sure, right? We're not fighting about that. What I'm fighting with you about right now, and again, I'm not trying to be mean. We'll go back to being friendly after this, hopefully. But what I'm fighting with you about right now is I can tell that your strategy in this conversation is to not clarify, at least it seems to me, okay? It seems like your strategy is to not actually give me information that lets me see what frame it is. Because the second I see what frame it is, that's where we're in the contradiction or reductio territory, right? So that's the actual challenge. And
Okay.
that's what everyone who's listening is going to want you to meet. They're going to want you to actually provide an answer that helps me understand which frame value is lost in. And if you have done that and I've missed it, then just clarify so I can understand where it is.
It's like saying the NTT is successful because when Beetlejuice asked Apollo for the trait, and Apollo gave the trait, Beetlejuice never understood the trait, so I guess he never actually met the challenge of the NTT.
I
If
didn't
that's
say
the
that.
framing that you want to go under,
I
then
literally
whoa,
didn't say
woohoo,
that.
congratulations. Wait, just
No,
a second, right?
no, but I
Because
didn't say. I agree. I agree.
you're not agreeing.
I do
Are you
agree.
agreeing right now?
Yes,
Okay, so
because
okay, so you
what I
agree,
said. No,
and
no,
could I
I don't
just
agree. I
finish?
don't agree that that's a correct interpretation. But I agree that you can have a case where you have answered and I've not understood the answer, but it has been informative.
But you're saying that this is in fact true given the evidence that I did not answer it.
I doubt we're in that case. Yeah.
And so what I'm telling you here is simply that the whole framing shtick, where you're like, okay, I don't understand the response you're given, and so you either did not give a trait that is informative with respects to what I in fact understand or whatever, or it is the case that you dodged the question. I'm saying that's a dishonest philosophical framing of the conversation, and I'm not going to go under that stuff. It's dishonest, and you know it. You know it's dishonest.
I completely disagree. I don't think there's anything that I've said that's dishonest. I know in my heart that I'm being
I think the
completely
connotations are.
whatever. I know my own intentions, and someone telling me that I'm being dishonest has no effect on me. I know my intentions are pure. You can't make me think otherwise. As for the actual question, do you want to answer it or not? And if you say no, I'll respect the no. But if you will, then I would
If I
like
want
to
to answer with a
actually,
different response for the third time, no.
as
I've
in,
already given
as
the
in,
response 2 times to the question.
you know what I mean by answer. I mean, help me actually identify where in the TEP value's lost.
Okay, so me not answering this question, me not
Don't
answering
get
this
hung up on
question
the
is
language
identical
of
to.
don't get don't no no
I'm
no
gonna be hung up on the
no
language.
no because
You're doing it again because
you're getting
you're
hung up on
interrupting. You're
yeah,
interrupting,
it's because
but you're
I
not agreeing
don't
with
think
me
what
right
you're
now.
doing is fair. I don't want to get hung
But I
up
thought you said a while ago
because
that your only condition for interruption is agreeing with my points.
you're getting I'm not getting look, I'm more concerned with my intentions and if I'm trying to get at the truth, and that's what matters to me. And I'm not going to be held to little minutia of what I've said here or there. It doesn't matter. People can sense my intention, and they can sense that I'm being honest, and they can sense that I'm
Yeah,
trying to
they got
get.
that
They can
spiritual
sense
power. I agree
they
with you. Yeah, they
they
got that
don't they
spiritual
don't need
energy right
any.
there. Yeah,
Firstly, you're the religious one. So if anyone believes in spiritual power, it's you. I'm just saying through whatever means, I think people can sense my intention. I suspect they can tell that I'm being honest, and I suspect that they can tell that I'm trying to ask something that you're not answering. Or at least that it's very
yeah.
unclear that you're answering. Or at least,
Uh-huh.
if you don't like that framing, that your answer is not getting through to me with respect to. So the challenge
That's
for
the best
you,
framing, actually. That's the best frame, which for some reason you
sure,
just do not want to
sure.
frame it like that because
Let's
it's
go
not
with that
flip on this
then.
point.
Let's go with that then.
Yeah.
Let's assume that I'm just not following. Help me understand then,
Okay.
Apollo. Just help me find the frame.
I don't think there's any other way in which you can follow this conversation because of the fact that I've given, in my opinion, adequate responses to the question numerous times, and you're still at the point of not understanding given your own perspective.
How about does anyone in this chat, can anybody in here understand which
Does
frame it
anyone
is?
in the chat of vegans
Let's
in a
can
server full of my fans agree with me or disagree with me? Is that your question?
I'm
Because I
I'm
think they're going to say yes, they're going to agree with you, right?
I'm not asking purely because I think that I'm not asking purely to
Hmm.
get just stop. I'm not asking purely to go nobody agrees with you. I'm also asking because maybe one of them is going to give the answer that I'm having a hard time getting from you. So if anyone in here thinks that they can tell what frame it is, feel free to speak up or say something.
I mean, repellents can mic up. The repellents were you here when I was talking about the normative function stuff? You want me to just repeat like the specific thing I was talking about?
No, all I know is roughly what you take a normative function to be. That's the only part I was here for.
Okay,
Yeah, I was just saying the normative
we did
function would
clear
just be the
that. Yeah.
traits. Yeah, well, that was like long ago, but like, um, what I was basically saying was when he asked me what the trait actually is, I was appealing to the normative function, to which when he asked for the clarification and I gave the definition, I then told him the specific content of the normative function by pointing out the normative ethical theory that I was appealing to. So repellent. Given that response, do you think it is the case that I did not answer the question regarding what the trait actually is, or no? Do you think that's something you can understand or wrap your head around?
To be
So, from my
just
understanding, the norm. Oh,
He's a neutral person, by the way.
just wait 1 second. The only thing I want to hear
Gotcha.
from the audience with respect to is if any of them can identify the frame where value is lost on your view. Does anyone think they can do that? Because that's what I'm looking for.
Oh my god. I'm not laughing at you, by the way, Isaac. I'm laughing at the fact that people perceive this as a substance dump because you agree to not fall in what I'm saying.
Well, I don't know, man. It's a bit of a
What's the
frustrating
word?
conversation, but this might just be
Oh
something
my
we can't
god.
make any headway on. So, I mean, if
Yeah,
you
I don't think there's any meaningful progression from here on. I
well,
think we should just
there would be a
end
thing
things off.
you could do though. Very obviously, you could try to help me understand what the frame is. I think everyone can tell that you could do that.
I think I'm at the point where it's not only would that be kind of a waste of my time if I was to try to help you with that, and it just comes off with a response which is I still don't follow the response, which is going to go on for the next 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 times. But also, I'm at the point where just like how you talked about how there are certain things which are in your head, which is not popping up, the same thing applies here anyways. But nonetheless, it doesn't change the fact that I've responded to your question. And I believe that it's just a huge, I should say, misinterpretation. Not from your end, but from the general audience's end. And if you have this belief, you can say this. To say that I did not answer the question, or rather, there's some problem with my responses because you did not follow my response.
What do you think my
The condition
criticism
for it to even
is?
criticize me is to say that you don't understand what I'm saying,
What
right? That's not a problem for me necessarily.
what do you think my
Okay,
criticism is?
if you're even making the criticism, I think it is from the
I'm definitely
perspective where
making a
you cannot
criticism.
spot where. Yeah, okay. So what you're saying is you do not know where in the TEP the value will be dropped off when you're comparing the animals to the humans. I know everything you're saying, dude. I can repeat everything that you're saying in this
So
conversation.
that
I'm
that's
tracking what you.
that's
I'm hold
that's
on,
part of it.
wait, hold on.
It's
Wait,
not the
okay.
whole thing.
So
The
I'm
other
not sure
part
which
is
other
that I
part
want
you're
you to
saying,
help.
but what I can in fact, what hold on. I'm not sure which other part you're talking about. What I can in fact confirm is that everything you've said in this conversation, I can not only repeat, but I've tracked without a shadow of a doubt.
Okay,
However, you
so
cannot say for some reason that you're criticizing me on the basis of even following my response. I think that's dishonest.
what I'm saying is that I currently have no idea which frame value's lost in, and I'm criticizing you for not engaging. I want you to actually try to tell me. Sorry, I don't mean to yell. I'm a bit frustrated, but I want you to try to tell me. And you're not, and it's frustrating. Why don't you just actually try to tell me where value drops off? Just help me find the frame. Don't just give me something that leaves me wondering what frame it is. Like, oh, the point where virtue consequentialism would say it's wrong. Okay, well, what fucking frame is that? Oh, the point where the animal no longer has the property that's in violation of virtue consequence. Okay, but what frame is that? Right? Everything you're saying isn't helping me understand what the frame is, and
Do you
that's
want
the
me to list the
challenge.
properties of virtue consequentialism and then just go over which specific properties are not violated?
I want you to tell me which frame it is. I want to be able to identify the frame.
To be a moral frame. So if you're going to ask me which frame within this specific normative ethical theory would it be that the value is dropped off at, all you're asking me therefore is just the properties, which by the way determines the moral facts, which the animals do not be compromising. And so I can just list all the properties one by one, then list all the things which determines positive consequences from negative consequences, which also plays a role. And then you're gonna still ask me what's the frame, but again, just to be clear on this, right? The reason as to why these questions are never gonna work is because in principle, right, the whole shtick of the NTT, which is the problem with it, is that at the fundamental level, if I'm giving this type of response, or anyone gives this type of response, you're not in any position to even criticize the position as uninformative from a general perspective point of view, especially if you have an understanding of the theory which is being baked in, which you agree determine the moral facts.
What do you
And that's the
think
thing which not only you're not understanding, but everyone else is not understanding for some odd reason.
what do you think I
And that's
mean
the
when I
problem with it.
what do you think I mean when I say uninformative?
What you mean by uninformative is you don't see where in the trait equalization process the value of the animal is dropped off at to make it the case that killing animals is okay. I
Okay.
understand your question, but it's not hard to understand.
So wait. Will you help
That
me
is what you're saying.
wait. So will you help me actually identify the frame? And if you say no, we can end, and I'll even give you the last word if
I
you want to have the last word.
okay. So I'm not gonna just pontificate and say I did and make you feel offended. I'm gonna just be humble and say I think I did by appealing to functional properties, then appealing to the things which would be the determination for those functional properties, then appealing to the content of that thing which determines the functional properties, which would be the virtue consequentialist position. So I
But
think I've done that on 3 different occasions. And now you're
obviously,
just asking me for. Hold on, real quickly. I'm almost there, by the way.
okay.
And now you're just asking me for extra help with
Yes,
the thing
give me
that you
extra
want to
help.
accomplish.
Please give me extra help. I'm trying to, like, obviously, the whole thing I'm trying to do here is understand where in the trade equalization process value's lost. I don't think you've given a clear answer to that, or if you have, it's not obvious to me. Maybe there's some way for someone to infer their way to where it is if they know enough about your normative view, but I'm not getting there. I have no fucking clue which frame it is. So I'm asking you to just
You have no clue
be
what virtue consequentialism is?
I have an idea what... Do you think knowing what virtue consequentialism is the same thing as knowing which frame value drops off?
Wait, you criticized me for asking you questions in response to your
Okay,
questions,
then
so I would
forget the
criticize you
question
right now.
then forget the question I asked. It's fine. The point is that I want to know where value drops off. I just
Wait,
want you to
but do you
basically...
understand the frame of virtue consequentialism? Yes or no? Just a yes or no question. Now I'm going to
I
be the one asking you yes or no
at a
questions.
very general level, yes, but I'm not going to let you start taking the line of
So
questioning. It's not.
how are you going to be
I'm not
making the
gonna.
claim that it's
I'm not
uninformative
doing
if you
it.
agree
I'm
that
not
you
doing it. I'm not
got
doing
you?
it. I'm not doing it. Sorry. This is the crux of this for me, Apollo. Is I want to understand what the frame is where value drops off. Perhaps you've conveyed it, and everyone else who seemed to comment has missed it. Perhaps none of us are getting it, and if we knew enough about your view, we would get it. I don't think that's the case. I think you probably haven't done it. But either way, will you try to? Will you try to help me understand which frame it is?
I've told you I'm not willing to go on this derail, right? I told you a
It's not a
while ago,
derail.
just to
It's
be
the
clear on
main
this. Hold on,
conversation.
hold on.
No,
Wait, now you're
you
interrupting.
can't
You're
call...
interrupting. Come
Yeah, but
on.
you're calling the
We're
main
being
conversation a
respectful.
derail.
You're hold on.
Okay.
Okay, you can disagree with what I'm saying, and you can establish as to why I disagree afterwards, and that's fine. Just like I disagreed with every single thing you've said. But I did not interrupt your point a while ago. So you just agreed, right? Because remember, the frame, the moral frame, which my trait is predicated upon, is something which is with respect to virtue consequentialism. You said yes to my question. You genuinely understand what that frame is. That's in contradiction with you saying you don't understand what the frame is, which makes it uninformative. Now
No,
again,
that's a confusion.
I
That's
know. Hold
wrong.
on,
That's
real quickly.
wrong.
Hold
It's
on.
wrong. I
I'm still
disagree.
talking. Just let me
I
finish.
disagree, though.
Let me finish, please.
Why do you want to? Why do
Okay.
you want to continue when you know I
You can
disagree?
establish your substantiation afterwards. Can I finish? I'm almost at one sentence.
Okay.
Okay. I know that your I know that your copium clinic of vegans in this server and your echo chamber is going to be like, oh, I think you can doctor. If you're agreeing that you understand this thing, which is my frame, and you're going to be making the claim simultaneously that it is uninformative with respect to you not understanding the frame of the trait equalization process, then that's a blatant contradiction. And it doesn't matter how much more disambiguation you try to pull off here, or you try to claim I'm being uncharitable. That's a blatant contradiction from a charitable perspective and from an uncharitable perspective.
No,
Now I can talk.
it's not. Someone could understand at a high level what virtue consequentialism is, as in it's some kind of fusion of consequentialism and virtue ethics, and still not know which frame you're talking about. For it, like, I mean, maybe if I knew enough about the view, maybe if I knew enough about your empirical assessment of the consequences. Papaya Thief, please mute yourself. Like, how do people not know how to mute a mic after this many years? Maybe if I knew enough about your empirical assessment of the consequences, maybe if I knew which virtues you care about, maybe if I knew all these things, I might be able to deduce the frame. But no, it absolutely does not follow from having a high-level understanding of what virtue consequentialism is that I know which frame value drops off in. That is completely wrong. And again, I just want to ask the main question, which I think you said you're unwilling to do this, which if you are, then if you would just say so...
Yeah, I did. I said that the conversation is becoming a waste of my time. Yeah, I said I did. Because I've done the same thing 3 times.
That
Yeah.
means you're unwilling to try to convey to me which frame value's lost in.
Any more than I actually did? Yes, definitely.
Okay. And you understand that from my point of view, I can't understand how you have at all, right? Like, I still literally have no idea what frame it is.
Just like how Beetlejuice or any
That's just a
down-syndrome
yes or
person
no.
would not.
I'm not a... Look, my IQ is 2 standard
I'm not
deviations
saying you
above
are.
the mean. I'm not a
I'm
fucking
not saying
idiot, Apollo. I can understand English just fine. Statistically, I'm likely smarter than you, actually. Okay? So let's not do the IQ shots. All I'm asking
I don't think
is...
so, given your
Okay.
track of disability, but that's fine.
All I'm asking... That's fine. You can say whatever you want. All I'm asking
Don't
is...
try to throw shots at me, dude.
Okay. All I'm asking... You said Down syndrome. You said Down syndrome, and I replied by saying...
That's not me throwing shots at you. I'm saying that the case we're talking about here is
okay.
akin to that case and so forth.
Yeah,
Not understanding
right.
anything.
And who would be the Down syndrome person in that analogy, Apollo? Would it by any chance be me? Like, come on.
No.
No. Oh, you're
No, it
in
wouldn't be.
the analogy, you're the Down syndrome person. That's the analogy you were giving, where you're
No,
retarded.
neither of us are. You're not getting the
You
analogy, dude.
the analogy was about someone not understanding what's being said after it's been clarified clearly. And if someone had fucking Down syndrome, they wouldn't get it. Who's the
I'm
person
saying
who's
the
not currently
outcomes
getting
are
it?
synonymous,
Obviously,
not
that's
that you
me.
are synonymous with the Down syndrome person. You're
Okay,
strong
so
man in my analogy again.
okay, I think that whatever, dude. I think that the analogy was pretty obviously painting me as someone who's not understanding what you're saying and saying, yeah, I get how you
Which
couldn't.
you agreed on. You agreed to not understanding anything I'm saying currently.
Yeah, but I don't agree that I don't understand because I'm analogous to a fucking mentally retarded person. Obviously.
You're analogous to that insofar as you guys both would not understand what I'm saying. Not insofar as you guys are equally intelligent.
Okay, and you're analogous to the sun insofar as you both have molecules in you. Okay, I'm kind of
That was
just
plenty more.
yeah, I'm fucking around a bit, but like, okay, so wrapping this up, this is where I'm at. I'm trying to understand where in the trade equalization process value is lost, as in which frame it is. Now, it's possible that you've provided that information somewhere and that I've missed it, or that you've given that information, and if someone just knew enough about certain aspects of your view, like which virtues you care about, what your assessment of the consequences of killing one or the other being is, that they would be able to pinpoint the frame. I currently am not able to do that. I'm looking at the situation as a fucking Down syndrome retard over here or whatever. I can't tell at all what frame it is. I have no fucking idea. I'm looking at the whole TEP. I don't know if it's the first frame where you have a human with one molecule altered or if it's the last frame where you have virtually a fucking cow. I have no fucking clue. I'm asking you if you'll try to convey it to me. And if you will just give me a clear no, then I'll say fine, and you can have the last word for however long as you want, and I will genuinely not interrupt no matter how fucking infuriated I become with what you say. So will you just answer that clearly with a yes or no? Will you try to
Yeah,
convey the
absolutely clear
frame to
no
me?
before.
Okay, so it's a
Absolutely
clear
clear
no.
no before.
Okay. You can have the
Yeah.
last word if you want. I'll let you go on. I will not interrupt. But for
I don't think
everyone
there's
listening,
anything else I need to mention.
before you start the last
Yeah,
word,
yeah, I really
just
don't
for
think there's
everyone,
anything else I
just let
need
me
to
finish.
mention.
Just one sec. For everyone listening, whatever
Gotcha.
the last word is here, I probably disagree with virtually all of it. Okay, but I'm not going to say anything, so you can go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I don't think I need to say anything with the exception of just, yeah, I believe that they're given the traits and so forth, insofar as that is concerned, and insofar as the question is concerned. And I think he kind of like tried to change the framing of the conversation from something which is not about normative ethics, even though that's inextricably tied to the question and the purpose of the question. And so, with that being said, I don't think there's anything else that needs to be added. And to believe that it is embarrassing, or I given an embarrassing performance because Ask Yourself did not understand what I'm saying, that's ridiculous. That's actually retarded. I can talk to anyone else in this VC about the conversation we just had, but either way, even if I wanted to give the trade, I'd have to go like literally right now because I have to go pray right now. It's Asher time where I'm at, so I have to pray Asher, and then I can
Okay.
come back anyway. So yeah, I think the conversation's done. Good conversation in the sense where it was entertaining, but not good conversation in the sense where it was infuriating to having to repeat the same things over and over because I believe that you're just not getting at the point where I was looking for it to get at. Right. So yeah,
Okay.
that's basically it.
Thank you for your time,
Mm-hmm.
Apollo. And if you want to follow up and talk about Islam sometime, I'm happy to do that.
Oh yeah, definitely got you. Have a good day.
Okay, you too. Does anyone else want to say or ask anything while I'm here on VC about this, preferably?
Yeah, apparently the trait or virtue was justice. So yeah.
Yeah, basically, at one point, I heard him say virtue consequentialism, and one of the virtues was supposed to be justice. And the kind of thing I asked back to him was basically where in the trade equalization process, what is true of animals, such that if true of humans, it would not be unjust or another violation of any kind of virtue consequentialism to slice their throat. So there was a reply given to that, but justice is just kind of another thing that doesn't actually help me zero in on the frame. Like, what's the frame where it becomes a justice violation?
Yeah, justice doesn't seem like a trait. It just seems to be like some judgment. But I mean, hey, bro, I don't know what Apollo said to that.
Yeah, I mean, well, the thing is,
I think
mm-hmm.
I think it's helpful. And I think you did the car analogy at one point, but I think the car in the parking lot analogy is really good.
Yeah, I like that.
And it's good to like really just hammer that home, because it makes clear that, and you could even make it more explicit that you can gain understanding. You could like name traits, and they can be the traits. You could like name things about the traits, and you can gain some understanding about certain things by naming certain properties or whatever. Just like you could do that about a car. Like you can say, if someone asks the question, like, help me narrow down which car is the correct car to pick in this parking lot. And someone could say, well, the correct car to pick is the car that has the value property of being consistent with virtue consequentialism, or the one that was designed by the best virtue consequentialist. Okay, well, have I got, you've gained information. It's informative in the sense that you've gained information, but it's not informative in the sense that you've gained information about the question you've asked, which is, what car is it? So have I narrowed down even one car in the parking lot? The answer is no.
Right. Yeah, that's completely 100% right. And it's always good to hear someone affirm exactly what I'm thinking. So thank you. And I don't know how much you listened to the whole thing, but I am pretty sure that I said almost literally that. I know I gave the car analogy at one point, and I also made sure to distinguish between completely uninformative versus completely uninformative with respect to where in the trade equalization process value is lost. I pointed out, for instance, that his answers might have conveyed something about how he thinks about ethics, or some other thing, but it didn't convey, as far as I can tell, the thing I was looking for, which is where in the trade equalization process value is lost. So uninformative with respect to that question. You heard me do this, right? Did you hear it?
Yeah, that's the... I was... I sort of was listening. I was listening, but I was also multitasking.
That's okay. No.
But the point is just, but this, either way, that is the point. It's just so distinguish informative versus informative with respect to the question that you're asking, because there's a little like kind of wiggle room that one might do. It's like, okay, well, I was informative. I did give you informative answers. Yes. Like, that's true, but but it's not informative to what I
I caught and replied to that.
And then it's just like completely uninformative with respect to the question.
Well, let me give you the car analogy. Let me give you the Apollo pushback to that, which is that it was informative with respect to that question, but you just didn't understand it. Or if you understand virtue consequentialism, then you must understand which frame it is. So it must have been informative. So you're contradicting yourself, Avi.
There you go. I guess I am. So I put it back to the car. It's like okay, well, if you just understood virtue consequentialism, then you must understand which car was in the parking lot. So you're contradicting yourself. It's like, okay, well, maybe, it's clearly not apparent to me how I would know which car it is. If I did learn more about virtue consequentialism, I would know which car in the parking lot is the car to pick. Well, and then that would just be the task for you to just like, okay, well,
exactly.
Provide what in virtue consequentialism gets me to narrow down which car it is.
Right. Okay. Someone might have a high level understanding of the view, but that's not necessarily going to allow them to isolate the frame, right? For instance, if they were to have some further information, maybe they'd be able to, although it's still needlessly difficult and like just spell out the fucking frame. But I mean, I could understand how maybe if I knew the set of virtues he cared about and their weighting versus consequentialism and his assessment of the consequences in both cases, well, then maybe I might be able to do some work towards understanding the frame. But it's not going to be the case that simply from having a high-level understanding of what virtue consequentialism is, a high-level understanding as in, I know that it's some fusion of consequentialism and virtue ethics, that you're going to be able to isolate the frame.
Yeah.
Okay, and then what about this one?
Yeah.
Well, I conveyed it, but you just didn't understand it.
Yeah, I mean, again, with the car, this is why I love the car analogy. It's like, well, I conveyed information to you that you would understand which car it was. You just didn't understand. Like, okay, well, maybe that is true. It could very well be that you said something, and I just didn't understand which car. Certainly not apparent to me how I'm missing anything that would tell me what car it is. And it's not like other people have failed in this way to communicate which car it is. It's like most people, overwhelming majority of people, can easily point me to a car.
Right.
But so it seems really weird. But okay, but if you think maybe there's a better way for you to explain it,
Yeah.
maybe there's a better way to explain it to anyone. It's just so that's again, it's just on you to explain it. And if everyone else is succeeding, is able to succeed at least, and tell me what fucking car is in the lot that I should pick, and then you're just telling me this thing, and it's just like I'm no closer. I haven't eliminated even one car. I haven't reduced my credence in one car by a fraction of a percentage point. Even it's like, okay, well, it could be true that I'm just missing some like archaic information, and in virtue of me not understanding what you're saying. I have a low credence in that happening because everyone else is able to do it.
Yeah,
So
that's exactly the reply that I would give. I would say, anytime someone says anything that amounts to, I did answer, you just didn't understand, my response is going to be, okay, well, that's possible. Maybe I didn't, but can you help me understand? And then also throw in the other point that you made there, which I also made, which is, it's kind of weird that it's this fucking hard. Like, it seems like everyone else can, just give an answer more or less, and then I do understand at least roughly what their answer is. So it's kind of suspicious that I, as a reasonably competent person who's like had this discussion a lot of times, can't seem to get any fucking idea of what the answer was based on what you've said. That's kind of suspicious and leads me to think you probably didn't give one. But sure, maybe you did and maybe I misunderstood. Either way, why don't you just try to do it? And also,
do you notice how all of these points? Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to add, also not doing it just kind of further, I think, establishes the kind of thing I was saying, which is the strategy is obviously, I think, just not to clarify the frame, because the second you clarify the frame, you get fucking clapped.
Yeah. You notice, though, how all of the things you brought up just neatly fit into that car analogy.
Of course.
The car in the parking lot analogy. Yeah. That's why it's just, and it makes it just so concrete and it's just so, and all of a sudden it just clicks with a lot of laymen, which is like, oh yeah, that makes sense. Like, I don't know what fucking car it is anymore. I've not narrowed anything down.
Yeah.
But like, and it's, when you keep it very abstract, it's like, it might go over some laymen.
I appreciate your point, though, that maybe the good thing to do optically would just be to frame every response in terms of the car, because then it just becomes kind of obvious how it works. Like, yeah, maybe you pointed out the car and I didn't hear what car you were talking about. Or like, maybe if I knew enough about your views on cars, I'd be able to infer what car it is, but I don't seem to have that information. I'm struggling. Also, everyone else seems to be able to point out what car it is by just using their finger or something. I don't know why it's proving so difficult here, and I don't think I'm someone with like bad vision or something, or who has trouble understanding like car facts, so I sort of suspect you're the problem. And additionally, it kind of seems like you might have a strategy that involves like not pointing at the car. So yeah, you can obviously give all those answers in terms of the car. Yeah.
Yeah, and also it just, it looks fucking retarded, like when you put it in that frame, for good reason.
Yeah, I do agree with that. Yeah. Repellent asks my view on the King Apollo as a reasoner now. Well, honestly, I haven't spent a lot of time talking to him. I talked to him yesterday. I talked to him today. I mean, I have different things. Like, he seems like he has decent understanding of things that are said to him, so it doesn't seem like he has trouble, like, tracking things. Although sometimes he kind of reverts to things that sound like not what I was talking about, so he might kind of lose the plot a bit here or there. But, I mean, he seems like he can follow things reasonably well. He seems like he has philosophy domain knowledge. I've not talked to him enough to know how much it is. If it's more or less than the amount I have, I'm not sure. But I don't like how he approaches things at all. I think that he uncharitably tries to needle on specific phrasings of things, and I think I made this point, like, not to toot my own horn. I think I made it really well with the is-ought gap. Like, most people who've dealt with that problem for a while know that there's this cheeky answer where you point out that you can technically cross the gap by explosion, right? But nobody's talking about that. And any of those people, if you actually prompt them with like, oh, do you consider an explosive answer a legitimate gap crossing? They're all going to say no to that. That obviously is not what they're talking about. So it would be pretty uncharitable, especially with someone who has a long history of like addressing the explosive case. That sounds like explosive diarrhea or something. That sounded weird. But like, it would be very weird and I think unfair and just a cheap shot to try to attack someone like that by being like, well, the particular time you talked to me, I didn't hear anything about explosions, so I think I answered, and I'm not going to try to cross the actual gap that you're interested in. I just want to make it clear that you can cross it by explosion. I'm not going to talk about anything else, and you didn't specifically hedge against that when you talked to me, so I declare victory. I think basically everyone would see that as a Pyrrhic victory. Is it Pyrrhic or Pyrrhic? I think it's Pyrrhic. And I just think that's, I just think it's not centered around truth seeking. Like, I feel like it's not, I feel like the goal there is to scalp claim, to go, here's a person who's fallen by my sword. Here's yet another scalp. And it's like, well, it's not really. Like, if you really want to claim a scalp, you got to beat someone down legitimately on something they're actually committed to, not try to, catch the time they didn't phrase something perfectly, or something like that. So, yeah, I mean, decent reasoner from what I can tell. Doesn't approach things in a way that I'd like, though. Yeah, I don't know if I'd say much else than that. I do think well, yeah, I think that's all I'll say. I don't know. Maybe
we can talk about we can talk about if this is over. We can talk about the Mike Gizertail stuff.
Well, yeah, let's finish this first. So I see Sophia's got one. It's helpful for people, and I'll start a fresh recording for that just so I don't have to clip it up later. It's helpful for people like Apollo to frame it information, probability theoretically, like Avi does, to avoid the sorties meandering he did. I don't think he really did that. I didn't hear anything about, like, vague, like, I can't, I can't point out the grain of sand or something like that. I heard a vague reference to the sorties at one point, but it wasn't clear that he was doing that kind of thing, so I didn't go down that road. Avi frames it as increasing the probability of any given car rather than pointing at a specific car. Yeah, I mean, that's fine, too. I do like that framing. I think that's a nice framing. Yeah, anybody else in here have any further things on this conversation? Or Avi, if you want to talk about any of the things that have been said, feel free to do that.
Oh, no, I'm finished up. I'm just, if you guys are wrapped up, we
we'll
can talk about Mike Gizertail.
Okay, we'll do that in a second. And anybody else with anything related to the Apollo one? Going once, going twice.